mother says he was a normal, happy boy until he became obsessed with black metal music.
Rock and roll!
Sounds like Christian Rick.
Heavy metal music.
Groups promote satanic worship.
They're anti-peace and anti-life.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Metal Face Podcast. The podcast where normally we discuss 3 metal albums each week, but this week we're doing something a little bit different. We're taking the metal out of Metal Face and covering 3 albums where the only rule is they cannot be metal.
So we're the Face Podcast now.
Just straight up Face Podcast.
All your faces
Okay. No.
discussed here.
You can cut that joke. My name is Ben, and joining me as always I have Tom. Tom, say hello.
Hello, Ben.
And my good friend Josh. Josh, say hello.
Hello, Ben. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Josh.
Hello.
So on this episode, we will be discussing Florence The Machine with their album Ceremonials. We're discussing Wolf People with their album Ruins, and Neutral Milk Hotel with their album In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. So with this being the no metal face, I think a good place to start would be to ask how much non-metal music do you guys actually listen to?
That's a good question, because for me, it's not like that much in my kind of day-to-day rotation. And to be honest with you, the album I brought this week, Florence The Machine,
it's actually pretty metal.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's pretty heavy. No, it's not something I listen to that much. It is an album I really like, and it's kind of a favorite of mine. But it's not something I have on my like kind of normal playlist. So
We almost said it.
Almost said regular rotation.
almost managed to avoid it.
Don't cross it off your bingo cards just yet.
You got excited. You got the pen out. You're gonna cross it. But no. Yeah, so it's one of those things where I don't really listen to it day to day that much. But when I do, to be honest, like it's in quite a specific subgenres as well. So I listen to quite a lot of I guess like folk and I mean that's kind of it. I don't know. I'm kind of selling myself short here. I do listen to a bunch of non-metal stuff, but I don't really track it in a way. Like I don't follow it in the way I do metal.
It's harder to identify the genres a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you sort of go, oh, I like indie stuff, but I mean, they have subgenres as well, I guess.
I also feel like it's one of those questions that, you know, like when you're in the pub and someone says like, oh yeah, you like this band, do you? What's your favourite song by them? And your mind immediately goes blank. You're like, oh, I don't even know.
You like music? Name all the notes.
There's no Encyclopedia Metallum or Metal Archives, whatever, for hip hop or indie rock. Maybe there is. I have no idea. So
well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, we're sort of assuming. Well, bottom line is the music we like the most is metal, so we know really a bit too much about it. So in theory, all this stuff exists as well for other scenes, but we don't know. It's unplumbed depths.
I think the metal subculture, though, they do like obsessively categorizing music into genres more than other subcultures.
Every
perhaps.
metal nerd's favorite subgenre.
Like
that's not black folk death. That's folk death black.
An argument we've had on this podcast like 4 times already. So.
Crossover thrash versus death thrash, which is actually thrash.
Well, no.
Don't open old wounds. Tom, how much non-metal do you listen to, then?
I feel like quite a lot, actually. I so I was really into metal when I was sort of about 16 to when I went to like university and stuff. And certainly at university expanded my music taste a lot, I think. And I was going through definitely a period of time over the last few years after I left university of like mainly just re-listening to metal that I liked. You know, and not really going out of my way to check out that much new stuff. Kind of feeling like, well, I've got that little fix there. And I really expanded my horizons at that point. Started listening to all sorts of stuff, particularly indie music and rock music and some electronic stuff as well. I sort of, I'll listen to anything if I like it, basically. And then in I think particularly over the lockdown or towards the end of 2019, I started spending a lot more time in the metal scene again and got really back into it, But I feel like in that time I learned a lot of like what was out there, I think that Wolf Alice and Arcade Fire are 2 of my favourite bands. Like
I've heard you mention
The Suburbs, but The Suburbs by Arcade Fire is one of my favourite albums, as is like pretty much everything that Wolf Alice have done. Not only that, but I'm a massive David Bowie fan. As I've mentioned before, I don't think that all David Bowie hits at like equal strength, but the stuff that is good is kind of amazing, and he sort of set the stage for so much of probably what we're about to talk about. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same as Josh, where I'm like, how much other music do I listen to? It's kind of hard to like...
It's hard to track, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of hard to quantify. I would say that normally when I put on some music, it's metal. It's probably like an 80-20 split, to be honest.
Yeah,
for sure,
but, yeah, there's like indie music that I like, but I like a lot of electronic and like synthwave stuff as well, which to be
Oh,
fair is
yeah,
normally
yeah.
quite close to metal in a way. So I don't know how different that really is.
Well, a band like Sisters of Mercy, they could easily spill over into metal without much effort.
Yeah,
very
yeah,
kind of
definitely.
gothic, like industrial
this-
kind of metal sort of thing.
We had this conversation when planning this episode, didn't we? Because we originally picked a bunch of non-metal, which was quite metal.
Close
in
to
its-
being metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did decide to sort of vary it up a little bit. I mean, and I think we've gone for stuff that's relatively close to what maybe our listeners are into. These bands all have guitars or drums to some extent, but there
It's
is
a
music
low
without
bar.
guitars or drums. But so me and you, Ben, we particularly bonded over sort of 80s like new wave and synth.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Oingo Boingo being the primary suspect here, but also like
Number one.
Human League or Ultravox.
Yeah,
or,
absolutely.
Tons of that sort of stuff. And I also like a whole bunch of sort of hip hop and rap and like sort of that sort of side of electronic music, bit of techno as well. But I often find with that, it's like I'll like a song more than I'll like, say, an artist or an album. So
yeah.
I was looking at some like rap that I like, Public Enemy, and I kind of thought, oh, maybe I could do Public Enemy. But then it's like, realistically, I kind of only like a couple of songs, and the rest of their music's a bit like harder to get into.
I know exactly what you mean. I do that quite a lot. I'll pick a song or like 2 songs from an album.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, yeah, this is cool. But then the rest of the album really vibe with me. I've done that a lot of times in like
Yeah.
non-metal sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I do feel like with non-metal music, I kind of miss like the culture and stuff that comes around with metal. Like I know everyone always says that, but I think it's true because I like the artwork on metal albums. I like the t-shirts. I like horror movies.
Yeah.
Like I liked that sort of stuff before I discovered metal, so
Yeah,
it was a
yeah.
perfect fit.
and the attitude of like a lot of metal being like, fuck you, I'm gonna do this anyway.
Yeah, it's the whole scene you get. You don't just get the music as part of the whole culture, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I miss
Yeah.
that and like outside of metal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, there's something about, and we've talked about this a little bit before, about how music sort of touches on your identity and how, you build an identity based on the culture that you're attached to. So the TV that you like, the clothes that you wear, the music that you listen to. Metal's especially like a strong component of that. Typically when people get into it, they start to kind of like, yeah, I'm going to buy all the shirts and I'm going to kind of sort of grow my hair and like,
Becomes quite like cyclical, doesn't it? Like you sort of into those things, so you get drawn towards the scene, so you fall further into the scene, and like reinforce
absolutely.
those things.
It's quite a well-defined scene in a way. Like there's an identifiable look for like metal, It's like the black and the leather and the sort of stuff, But I wouldn't be able to tell you what your average rap fan looked like, You could draw a loose stereotype or something, but realistically, hell of a lot of people like rap music.
Definitely, yeah. And I think the mainstream appeal of metal has waned probably quite a bit over like since like the 80s and stuff, whereas other genres have maybe come towards more of the forefront, like rap, whereas metal has maybe been on the decline in the mainstream. Other things, not so much.
Well, it's interesting. It's just kind of been like boiling away in the background for like 50 years.
Yeah, it's like falling down the back of the fridge, and people don't want to like
It's mouldering.
clean it up. Yeah.
I it's just a cyclical thing, though, isn't it? Because it's genres rise and fall over time. Maybe in a few years we'll be going to see orchestras again.
Wearing big powdered wigs.
It's always possible.
Well, that's you come to a good point there. because,
Post-apocalypse.
I also like quite a lot of soundtrack music as well. So I find myself listening to sort of movie soundtracks and game soundtracks a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of that
Yeah.
kind of like. Well, we talked about this with Ownerism, right? That kind of epic fantasy stuff. It's not a leap to a lot of metal, like battle metal and stuff like that.
Yeah, because again, I'd end up just listening to the stuff that's like close to metal.
It's
like,
difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very one-dimensional, I guess.
Well, because when things go too far the other way, I sometimes just find they don't have the elements of music that I like. I mean, say like jazz. I've said before, I have real trouble getting into jazz because there doesn't seem to be an instinct to like hit things really hard.
Yeah.
Or, like absolutely blast it out.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of expression in like wind instruments and stuff, like or brass instruments, whatever they are, like saxophone or whatever. But it doesn't have that same kind of high impact that I just tend to seek out in music.
I love how we know like 4 instruments on this podcast. It's like drum, guitar, bass.
Maybe keyboards.
Ooh, and push, yeah.
The thing is, I know what keyboards sound like. I don't really know how they work. They seem a bit like magic to me, so I only really know 3 instruments.
Whenever I hear something that isn't a guitar, bass, or drums, I'm like, that's probably a keyboard.
Guitar, bass, drums, battle, atmospheric sound effects.
The Davies typology of instruments.
I like this album, but it could have done with a bit more anvil sounds in it. Ding, ding.
I know there's some song by Obscura where they sample an anvil sound as part of a breakdown.
Amazing.
It sounds really good, but it is just... You don't get that in indie
hilarious.
rock. That's what we're missing out here. You don't hear Florence with her anvil sounds, do you?
Well, that's it. I mean, we'll go into this later, I imagine. But there is a sort of thing where I sometimes wish that the sounds that they would use that they're willing to use in like experimental indie music, I kind of wish there was more of that attitude in metal. And I also kind of feel like some of the stuff that metal does, I wish I could hear some of that more in indie. Like, there's not much crossover. Baroness is probably the one that comes to mind.
True.
They sort of sound like an indie band through a metal filter.
Well, I think an issue with metal is that, and maybe this is an issue, maybe it's just my perspective, but it's very kind of purist in its style, isn't it? You know, it's not like when we have things like metalcore coming out or new metal coming out, you know, instead of that being like a cool new genre, everyone kind of laughs at them. And I'm not just saying that because I'm bitter because I like metalcore, but you know, like I don't. Maybe I'm completely ignorant of other music scenes, but like I feel if you know, I don't know, the indie scene, if you had some new fusion coming out, it wouldn't necessarily be looked down on the same way.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we see things like even Ghost, who are huge right now. People see that coming out and they go, no, that's not metal. That's like rubbish. And you're like,
yeah, people object to Anal Nefrek for using like industrial sounds and like drum machines and you know. That
so
sort of
really,
thing.
if you
It's
try
like,
and push the boundary in any direction, there's gonna be people who are gonna go,
Yeah,
no.
if you don't just play another Slayer album, someone's going to complain it isn't real music, and it's like...
Yeah, well, it can be a bit of a failure of the scene sometimes, where it's like, actually, experimental stuff is how music moves forward in general.
Yeah.
I think people are worried about losing this like metal thing that we all love, but
Yeah,
like,
and I get
you know,
that.
I think you've got to keep
Yeah.
pushing it. You know, like
It's a difficult balance to strike, for sure.
yeah, you can have like expansion with something like Ghost, and it's like that's allowed to a degree because it's within the like bounds of metal kind of thing.
It's still
I don't know.
spooky, it's still sacrilegious, so it's kind of got the
Yeah.
legitimacy. If you had like a Christian metal band doing that, it would get completely laughed out, I think.
Yeah, I think it's like it's partly to the scene's detriment, but also slightly to its credit because
Yeah.
it means if you get into metal, there's like an overwhelming wealth of like bands that are just sort of trying everything within this one sound. And sometimes having those limits on creativity can lead to like a massive amount of creativity and
Oh,
variation.
absolutely, yeah.
This would be like quite a cliche question, I think, that we've probably all heard a lot, and I know we've touched on it a couple of times in previous episodes. Do you find that listening to a lot of dark music can affect your mood? Do you ever find that like sometimes you want to listen to something indie because it's a bit more uplifting? Like, which way around does it work for you? Because I know for me, sometimes when I'm feeling like pissed off, listening to metal makes me feel a lot better because you're kind of like, it's like a release.
Yeah.
It doesn't like amplify that feeling. Like, what about you guys?
I definitely know what you mean, where like if you're feeling a bit miserable, you listen to sad music and you kind of, it feels cathartic. But this happened to me quite recently, actually, where I was kind of feeling a bit down all the time and I was like, oh, what's going on here? And
Imagine you
I
black and
literally
white.
put on like some upbeat
He just
music.
looks in the mirror and he's wearing corpse paint.
I think it was literally like "Lean On" by Major Lazer or something. Do you remember that song from like 7 years ago? Like
Really?
some track like that. And I was like, huh, I feel really good. And I realised that maybe starting my day by listening to like death metal might put me in the wrong frame of mind sometimes. But I don't know. That might just be me.
Sometimes you need that.
It depends how you're listening to it, I think, because like quite often I'll listen to, I don't know, say black metal or something, and you are listening to kind of the instrumentation of it and like not kind of picking up the mood. You're more like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
But like I sort of find that I mentioned this in the previous episode about Necrofilth is that like, you know, life involves a lot of like angst of like just trying to do things right, trying to be a decent person, that sort of thing, trying to like not fuck everything up. And then metal does have that thing of it's like a release of all that tension. It's like the least anxious music going a lot of the time because it's just like, I don't give a fuck. Sometimes you just need that as a release. But it's a good question about like, when do you listen to indie music? How does it affect your mood? And, you know, realistically, if I'm cycling and it's like it's like a sunset and I've had a really good like evening out with some people or whatever, I'm more likely to listen to something which is, a little bit more kind of chill and transcendent and can make you appreciate the moment at like a slower pace, you know, something that feels a lot warmer.
Yeah.
I doubt I'd be listening to Migler in that situation.
Yeah, for
What
sure.
about you, Ben?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think I listen to metal probably 80% of the time, and I find that within metal you can get a lot of different like emotions anyway. So you can get the uplifting stuff, you can get the like, you know, fuck this, I'm just gonna get it over with kind of music, like when you're at work or something. So like. Yeah, I don't tend to stray outside of it too much, but I mean, I love like some synthwave music when I'm like doing some like boring data entry at work, and I just want like electronic beat in the background.
For sure, definitely.
I gotta say, whenever I'm like writing code or something, listening to that kind of music makes you feel like you're like a hacker in an 80s movie. It's great.
Yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? Sometimes, like, you want to dive into these sort of historic, I guess, genres, like New Wave or something, to feel a little bit different. You're going on a night out, you listen to some 80s New Wave, it will just put you in that mindset. That's a really satisfying thing. It's like, you feel like you're in a film or something, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like no matter what people say, everyone likes doing that a little bit.
And now, I don't know if you want to include this in the podcast, but a little insight for our listeners. We're actually recording this episode, which is the first episode we've recorded during the day, and we're all drinking a cup of tea or a coffee rather than a beer. So it's nice and sunny, and it feels a lot more wholesome than our normal episodes.
It does. I don't feel like I have to sort of prepare for a descent into hell like Dante every episode.
Should we be the Indie Face podcast now?
Let's just do it, yeah.
Fucking hell, yeah, god damn.
Last of one season, gave up.
We could change genre every season.
We're the Classical Face podcast.
Classical face.
Just do an absolutely terrible job of reviewing classical music.
That would be hilarious. I think that would be
12
that,
episodes.
That's a special next season. We can definitely tackle.
I feel like people would be more likely to listen to that in a way. Three idiots talking about classical music.
I don't even know what all the instruments are called in that.
Well, there's drums, bass, guitar, and atmospheric battle sounds. I think those are the instruments.
No, you're forgetting the orchestral elements that you have on your keyboard.
And the anvil, of course.
Right, so should we make a start on our first album this week?
Yeah, so first up this week we have Ceremonials by Florence and the Machine. So, those astute listeners amongst you might have noticed that this transition was actually a Florence the Machine special. It sounds slightly different from our normal transitions. And if you can work out what the difference is and leave a comment or write in and tell us, you'll get mad kudos and brownie points from us and get a shout out. So, go for it. So, today we're talking about Ceremonials by Florence and the Machine, stylized as Florence plus the Machine. Florence the Machine are a British indie rock kind of / baroque pop band, I've seen them called, from London, formed in 2007. They draw their name from their eponymous lead singer, Florence Welch, and her collaboration with fellow singer and keyboard player Isabella Machine Summers, which is like...
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a pretty cool...
Yeah.
No one's ever called me Josh Machine Redmond, which I'm quite sad about now, actually.
What kind of a machine?
I don't care, just a machine. So Ceremonials was their second studio album, released in 2012. Their first album coming out a few years before, being called Lungs. I'm a big fan of this album. It sounds really big, and there's lots of things going on, which I'm always a fan of. And that's one of the main reasons I like metal, actually. I really like the kind of maximalist sound, which I think this album delivers on.
Yeah.
If this was a sci-fi concept album, I might actually just have this as my favourite thing ever. I feel like there's a lot to like here. There's a lot of things going on. It's not what I'd normally pick to listen to be honest, because I like my riffs. But for me, this album really captures a lot of the spirit of what I like about metal music, and especially the kind of metal I listen to. And I'm really interested in what everyone else thinks and what opinions you guys have. So, Ben, as a fellow kind of prog fan, I feel like my kind of love of prog influences my love of this. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I can see what you mean about like the maximalist elements. Like Florence's vocals are just like instantly recognizable. I haven't really listened to Florence the Machine before, but as soon as I put this album on, I knew I'd heard a lot of these songs before.
So it's like ubiquitous in like pop culture if you were alive in 2010s, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The instrumental side of the album is strong, but I think it's just totally dwarfed by Florence's performance throughout. She's just an amazing singer, and the music's pleasant, enjoyable. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to say anything bad about. It sounds good. It sounds nice. It's really nice to listen to.
I think there's real power in her voice, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's something that often keeps me from getting into stuff that's a bit more kind of, indie rock sort of thing. Is I need some sense of atmosphere or power to enjoy music a lot of the time. But there's also so much going on with the instrumentals as well. It particularly reminded me of Arcade Fire's The Suburbs, which is one of my all-time favourite albums. I've said that 3 times now.
Really like it.
Just in the sense of how many instruments you can hear. It doesn't seem like it at first, but if you try and count them, by the end of the album, you're like, they're doing a lot there. Like,
No, it's a
there's
huge
real-
amount, absolutely.
I had that exact experience actually listening to the album. Was the first time I listened through, I was basically just paying attention to the vocal track, and then I thought to myself, I need to actually listen to the music as well, and like realised how much depth there was there.
Absolutely. There's a brilliant atmosphere about this album where, as you say, the vocals are very powerful. It feels very dramatic to me. Like, it does sound nice, basically, but it sounds to me like I sort of end up picturing like sort of a club night where like things are going wrong, and this song is almost like the inner monologue of like a really dramatic night where it keeps running into the wrong people or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel that. It's like energetic, but still really, like, it feels quite tense in places. And it has a lot of kind of dark undertones alongside, like, sometimes quite uplifting tracks and things.
There's a kind of like Last Days of Rome feel to it almost. Like it's kind of a slight desperation.
Yeah. And rhythmically, like, it's quite, like, it doesn't really let up, you know? It's kind of, like, pounding all the way through, I think, as you said in the pre-show, Tom. Like, it keeps moving. It doesn't really slow down and start noodling or getting really spacey. It keeps it up, even in songs like, so the opening track, Only for a Night, that's quite a kind of spacey sounding song, but it's still got a very strong sense of rhythm and progression through it. And I think one thing they do really well is all of their songs crescendo really strongly, and they build up to something really strong by the end. So it feels like you go on a journey as you go through the track, which really gives a lot of staying power, I think.
Yeah, I sort of found that, like, you know, you'll hear, like, I don't think you get this quite so much in metal, where it's like, you get, like, the first chorus and it sounds cool, you get the second chorus and it, like, maybe it, so, say the first one's, like, standard sound, the second one, like, removes a lot of the elements, but puts, like, an orchestral sound in instead, and then the third chorus is, like, a combination of those two things. It's almost like thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah.
You know, that whole, like...
The Hegelian dialectics of rock music.
Exactly, yeah.
No, I totally know what you mean, but one thing that really struck me is, for me, this album really, despite it not being even rock music, really, you know, there's very little guitar in there, like there's a bit, but it's not really guitar led. This still has a lot of, I don't know, for me, it captures the spirit of a lot of metal music in the sense of it being really big and sounding large, and it's not kind of, it doesn't make any apologies for itself, I don't think, and it just goes out there, and it really just is very kind of unique and recognizable.
It's very confident in its sound, isn't
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's something you don't necessarily see. Like, one of the big issues I have with some other music, like if you have, like, I guess, like a quote marks indie rock band or whatever, and they kind of have the standard, you know, guitar-based drums and things, sometimes it can feel a bit, you know, it doesn't sound huge. It sounds quite standalone. Whereas this, I think, because there's a huge number of instruments, I think there's lots of samples going on, there's lots of things layered on top of each other. It really fills the room.
It's almost kind of like quite cinematic in a way.
Yeah.
There's something about it that has a slightly sort of folkloric feel about it.
Oh, for
you know
sure.
What I mean, it seems rooted, and I can't really identify what it is that makes it sound like that. But they've got, like, I guess they've got, like, harps and, like, you know, stuff like that in there.
Yeah, there's a wider instruments for sure that do it.
Yeah, it sort of situates it in this kind of world of, like, I just kept thinking of, like, English folklore type things of, like, you know, dryads and woodlands and stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting because I've never seen them live. I'd really like to see them live, but I looked on the Wikipedia page for the band. There's a couple of photos of them performing, and their sets are all, like, super, like... So one of the pictures was everything with loads of flowers on it. It looked very kind of Midsummer Festival.
I saw that.
Oh, right.
And Florence herself normally seems to wear some, like, normally quite, like, elaborate looking outfit, and it's all quite theatrical. It's very cool. And it's just, I don't know, for me, metal's at its best when it's doing this kind of stuff. So to see it in another genre that's so different, but yet manages to do all the things I like, with a different set of tools, I find that interesting.
Be a bit eccentric and be a bit over the top. Brings a lot to it, even beyond just for music, like you say, the performance, the outfits and things like that.
Definitely, I think the theatricality is, like, something I'm really drawn towards in music. I know people who will definitely see it as, like, oh, it's a gimmick, and, you know, if you have to dress up, is your music even that good? But I really don't think on those terms.
Totally.
I think that, like, the sound is one thing, and the theatric element is just, like, another thing that you can bring to this concept of the band. It doesn't have to be, like, purely audible. It never really is anyway, because albums almost always have, like, cover art. They have lyrics which put, like, you know, words in your head and images in your head, and, like, you know, a good gimmick on stage is just like an extension of that.
Yeah, and if you see a band live, unless they draw the curtains and perform and that you can't see them, there's always going to be some element of that, isn't there?
But even hearing their name, unless they're named Band A and Band B, you're still going to have, like, an impression based on the name. You know,
Totally.
like,
And even then, even if you had like a completely anonymous, like no lyrics kind of thing, even then, music is always drawn from like traditions of music in the past. If if you have band A and band B, and band A has a sort of like pounding synth drum in the background, it's still going to put you in mind with something that's like exists in the world and is like is like real in culture.
One of the kind of issues that I did have with the album is that I kind of wonder if they're sort of suffering from their own success at this point, because I knew the sound of Florence the Machine having never listened to them. I instantly recognised her voice. I instantly recognised quite a few of these tracks. And I wonder if there's like pressure on them to write some of their hits again and again, because I felt like some of the tracks were sort of trying to imitate things like Shake It Out, which was probably the biggest track on the album.
Yeah.
And then, but when it got to a track like Seven Devils, I really, really liked that because it felt like a really different attempt on the music. And weirdly, the comparison that came to my head, which I didn't expect to make, was when we talked about Dimmu Borgir earlier in the season.
Oh, yeah.
And like that album took one thing and did it really, really well, and they did it again and again and again. But I was kind of like, well, I'll just pick the best track out of this, and that'll be enough. And
you want to hear them try something different with that sound.
Yeah, I really liked Seven Devils.
Me too. Yeah.
As a different sort of take on their sound, and I kind of wish there was they could have cut maybe 3 or 4 of those tracks that were like just a less amazing version of Shake It Out, and maybe done some more different tracks.
Yeah, you wonder how much they're under like music industry pressure to be like, you have to write a 14-song album, and we want like
ballad.
Yeah, we want this many songs to do like music videos for, which are gonna be on this specific release platform and stuff like that. That is like a pressure that massive bands have that like Dimmu Borgir probably don't.
A bit less, I imagine.
I do think though also this is their second album, so even if I don't actually know how successful Lungs was, I think it was pretty big. I don't really know how like when they shot to fame. There is a limited amount of corpus for them to copy before, but I do take a point in the sense that they do kind of retread the same ground a lot. I don't know. At the same time, I think it's an interesting point with the industry pressures. I that could well be it, but I think also just an album that's an hour long, it's really hard to not repeat yourself.
Oh yeah. No, definitely. No, this isn't unique to this album. I mean.
Oh no, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to like be too nice or too mean on like talking about something that isn't metal. Like it's the same criticism I have of a lot of metal albums. Is okay, I've heard this. You're just doing the same track again. Like it's not something that I would just point towards this album as doing.
No, for sure. I think most albums in the world could do with being about half as long, to be honest.
But I mean, this is like a bit of an aside, but then it's quite often the tracks that the artists don't expect to be massive end up being their massive ones, right? So
of course, yeah.
It's like, it's weird in that way.
Yeah, and it's going to sound a little weird, but I'm a big fan of like quantity in art. Most of the great artists in the world, they made really good stuff, but it was like the tip of the iceberg of how much they created. Really, a creative person, in my opinion, is going to want to do lots of stuff.
Absolutely.
Like David Bowie, like the amount of music he made, not all of it's amazing, but you can't help but look at it and be like, wow, that guy was a true creative.
I know what you mean, actually. I think the cool point about that is that each person will have a different favourite track.
Yeah.
And I think that's one benefit of having a long album with lots of songs.
Very
is that
good point, yeah.
So like if you look at at least on iTunes, the top songs from the album, I think it's Never Let Me Go and Shake It Off and things like that.
Oh really? Oh, not songs that really kind of took my attention, but maybe that's, as you say, because we're coming at it from a different point of view.
If they had just put on like the 5 best songs that they liked the most, maybe they wouldn't have put on Only for a Night or something, which is one of my favourite tracks. I think it's a really difficult balance to strike.
That's a good point. And also, 14 songs is not that long.
No,
really.
no, yeah.
But from another perspective, in that, if you listen to this band and you like the sound, you might be like, oh, great, there's 14 songs on this album.
Absolutely.
And I'm kind of going to vibe with all of them. I feel like that a bit with Wolf Alice, is like their first album has almost 20 songs in it or something. And I like the sound enough that I'll just put it on and listen to the whole thing, and an hour later I'm still listening and it's like, yeah, great. It's better than it being 20 minutes and being like, yeah, I love this, but there's not much of it.
Well, you see, you're kind of talking me around a little bit, but I also feel like I'm going to stand my ground on this a little bit. Because I think maybe the best compromise would be to return to the sort of B-side system, I thought maybe they could have had 7 headline tracks, here's some more of what we did, which is like that sort of thing, and then maybe your favorite track will be on the B-side, and that's always amazing. So
but equally, I think we look at metal in terms of albums because it's, I think, a very album driven genre, and I wonder if maybe other genres just aren't so much about the albums and it is more about a body of work with some hits.
Yeah, it's more about the singles maybe.
We know very little beyond our cave.
What is Baroque pop?
Who are these strange figures What are they playing? Where are the battle sounds?
Who is this Florence and her machine? Alright, so I think this has been a surprisingly quite, not controversial, but we had a good chat about it. I've enjoyed it a lot. It's been really good to hear what you guys say. So, Ronnie, what are your favourite tracks? So, Ben, why don't you tell me?
Breaking Down, No Light, and Seven Devils were my 3 favourite tracks, which is quite a few, you know. I mean, I feel like I've been fairly critical of the album in what I've said, but like, I think there was just a lot more for me to say on the things that maybe I didn't like, when overall it's just nice music and it's pleasant, and I couldn't really think of much more to say than that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's definitely made me want to listen to their other album, Lungs, definitely. I'll be honest, I didn't know this was only their second album, and that's fucking impressive, to be honest. And yeah, I'd definitely like to hear Lungs now. I'd love to see what they started off with and just how much difference there is. And it's, I would say, this is probably the most popular music I've listened to in a very long time. So that's been interesting, because I think I'm, as much as I like to think I'm not a stereotypical metalhead writing off things that aren't metal, I do that. So it's been good to listen to something that's classically popular.
I know what you mean about the popularity of this album. Arcade Fire and Wolf Alice are big bands, but there's something about it where it feels a little bit more outsidery, just because, you know, they're not like, I don't think of them as being like the cultural icons that Florence the Machine were in the 2010s, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, having said that, I would definitely think I would come back to this album. I don't think it's going to be a favourite of mine, but I think there are a couple of songs on it, Breaking Down and Seven Devils, I think the same songs as you, pretty much.
Yeah.
Those were my favourite songs, and I've come back to Breaking Down quite a lot, actually, since I first heard this album. It's one that I've, you know, put on when I'm walking to the shops or whatever, just because, like, it just sounds really nice, you know, it's just well recorded, it just sounds beautiful. Wow, this music is like pure serotonin. What's up with that? Where's the intensity?
Why aren't the lyrics about killing anyone? What the fuck is this?
Who dies in this song?
Yeah, what's the point?
So Josh, you picked this album. How about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I haven't actually really listened to other Florence that much. It's something I need to do. So I think after this, I'm definitely going to go away and listen to Lungs, and I think also one of the more recent albums, How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful, I think it's called. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. For me, my favorite tracks were Only for a Night and Never Let Me Go, which I think is quite different from you guys, interestingly enough. Only for a Night, I think, is just probably a really well-written, really excellent song.
Yeah, no, that one did stick in my head, definitely.
I think it just uses all the different elements really well. It sounds really big. And I think maybe also it's being coloured because the prog metal band Periphery did a cover of it, which I really like. Wow. So, that might be part of it too. But no, absolutely. Big fan of this.
So, moving on to our second album this week, we are going into a slightly more psychedelic direction with Wolf People's album, Ruins. So, Wolf People are an English psychedelic rock band formed by singer and guitarist Jack Sharp in Bedford, England in 2005. And I'd say their sound is a perfect split of folk, rock, and general psychedelic influences. They've released a total of 4 full-length studio albums before announcing an indefinite hiatus in January 2020, citing the increased geographical distance between the band and increased family commitments.
I thought you were going to say, like, the increased geographical distance between Bedford and where they were touring. Like, what's happening to it? It's drifting
it's
out
just
to the
becoming
sea.
too much effort.
Tectonic plates have shifted.
This road's getting longer.
Bedford is now located in South America.
Yeah, so yet another band that I've really got into, and then they've split up, so that's always a great feeling.
Oh, yes.
Stop getting into bands.
Yeah.
Yeah, fucking hell.
I'm the common factor here. So
How many bands have you
You need
destroyed?
to stop listening to Anon Afrak right now.
So today we're talking about Wolf People's 4th studio album, Ruins. Tom, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this was a great listen. I kind of, straight away, it was like, it starts with that sort of really nice, soft sort of intro, right? And then there's just that, like, of the guitar, and I was like, okay, yeah, here we go. And then, you know, my instinct was like, okay, this is going to go into something really sludgy and heavy. And then it was kind of like, no, it doesn't. The drum beat is like, you know, there's energy to it, but it's essentially quite light. Kind of put me in mind of the Beatles, actually. I don't know the Beatles catalogue as well as I would like to, but I know it sounds like some of the Beatles that I've heard.
Yeah.
So that was cool. Yeah, it does have that kind of psychedelic feel to it throughout, which is not something I listen to that much, but definitely something that I really vibe with. I think there's something about psychedelic music and psychedelia in general. It appeals to something in your inner mind, doesn't it? like the kind of the random shit you see when you're half awake.
Yeah.
You know, when you're like you're dreaming, but you're kind of still a little bit awake.
It's like unformed consciousness, isn't it? It's just like
It is, yeah, and that's kind of how it feels. So it was kind of a pretty like natural comparison to draw with something like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of the kind of subject matter and the feel of the music in general.
Yeah.
It reminded me also of Cream quite a lot as well.
Yep. Yeah, definitely in the guitar tone, I think. There was a lot of sort of very distorted, blown out kind of guitar sound.
Yeah, and the way the vocals go from like being very high to being kind of in that kind of middle fuzz kind of register. That was cool. I like that. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, so for me, this was a cool one. It reminded me a bit of The Sword, actually, when they get a bit more weird and vibey in their most recent stuff.
Yeah, because they've toned down the like metalness.
Yeah, they're kind of psychedelic now, actually, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
A lot of the songs are about getting high as well, so I don't know how that plays into the psychedelic part of it. But no, it's I'm a fan of this. It was probably, of the 3 albums we did this week, the most similar to stuff I listen to normally, because I'm a big fan of The Sword.
Yeah, I do feel like I cheated slightly.
I
I feel like I probably picked the most normal taste adjacent.
You could probably put this like into an audio program and just swivel some dials and turn it into metal.
Yeah, if you turned up the distortion on the amp slightly, this would be a metal album.
I don't know, I still maintain that Florence the Machine aren't that far from Dimmu Borgir.
Florence, I mean, I think I do see a point, actually. If
I'm
you
kind
had
of knowing what you mean more
Yeah.
and more. Like, you could sort of see them in a sort of like elfine kind of dryad world, right?
I would love
They're
to
going to
see
meet in a forest one day and be like, what are you doing here?
I just
Dimmu Borgir have got a goat.
the crossover needs to happen. I think that would be really good.
I've thought quite a few times this week of I would love to hear bands covering like some of these songs, like you say, a Periphery. I'd love to see Dimmu Borgir covering Florence the Machine. I'd love to see The Sword covering these guys, you know?
Can be good, it can be terrible, but I don't even. I love covers, but they can often go awry.
I didn't like the Periphery cover, to be honest.
You didn't?
Yeah, sorry.
That's alright, you're forgiven. This time. Yeah, with this album, covers aside, it does have a very nostalgic feel to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would actually be interested to see them, maybe cover like a pop song and make it sound like what would this be like if it, was written in like the 70s after you just smoked a pound of grass or whatever.
Cost you 50p.
Yeah. But I don't know. I wrote my notes. I could imagine this being played at Woodstock, but I don't know if that's like an anachronism or not.
I think that's kind of relatively accurate. It's not a long shot, to be
No,
honest.
I
I think it's
think
interesting to see them calling back to genres that have kind of passed out of the public eye. And I'd love to know if there's like a new scene that's like recreating some of those 60s psychedelic sort of things.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they've done. Like that's almost one of my criticisms of the album, is that it feels like they've like put a capstone on those genres, on that psychedelic rock, Summer of Love, things like that. It feels more like a capstone for genre than maybe treading new ground. But
yeah,
I feel like that was maybe intentional, and I made the comparison in my head this week, which I don't know if is an entirely complimentary comparison, but they feel like the Spinal Tap of psychedelic folk, where I'm like, they are so this that it's almost like too much. And
at points it feels like there's some effort being put into promoting that look.
Yeah.
Like where it doesn't feel wholly natural.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's such an unusual criticism to have, and I don't really want to frame it as a criticism, because it's almost like you've done this too well.
Yeah.
We've talked before about sort of the quality of the sound on an album, and I think it was when we talked about Chemistry of Consciousness by Toxic Holocaust, sort of referencing the fact that the music is recorded.
Yeah.
And I feel like we do a lot of that on this album as well, where like the voice and guitars are purposely affected in a way to make them sound like they're coming from a record or a wireless radio. Again,
Certainly,
feeding into that 60s sort of like feel to it.
I've been thinking about this a lot recently. The idea that music these days is recorded, it's not played by like minstrels in a pub. It's like you can take the sound and like you say, make it reference itself. Like the way that a microphone is set up will change the sound of the voice, and it's like that's not something that existed like really before this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
so electronic music, and particularly like pop music that followed particularly the 50s, but also the 60s, it can kind of reference the fact that it's recorded. And Nafrat can have an inhuman drum beat, and this is something you see all the time in electronic music, where nobody can play this like organically. You know?
Yeah,
it has to kind of be recorded.
There's been a real obviously over time fidelity increases in music. It's got to a point now where it's so high fidelity, whereas like a vinyl record would have imperfections, and like old equipment would have imperfections, analog equipment versus the kind of stuff we have these days. So I think now bringing that back in intentionally is quite like an interesting approach.
It's quite risky in a way. Like it's something I'm almost surprised modern music fans have appetite for, because it's like, why would you intentionally make your music worse?
Yeah,
in one sense, but it doesn't make it worse. It adds much more atmosphere to it, so it's a weird one.
It adds a lot of character, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Although, you know, going back to the album, I have to say that I feel at times like they kind of don't achieve that like characterful vinyl kind of style that maybe they're hoping for, and I feel like I would prefer this if it did have a bit more of that kind of more organically recorded kind of character to it.
Yeah.
But like that's not a criticism I was expecting to make, because ultimately like I do like the album a lot.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's one of these things where, like, almost through referencing the fact that it's recorded in such a way, it's such a modern thing to do, it kind of knocks out the nostalgia in a factor a little bit. Because, like, the idea of these, like, obviously nostalgic music isn't a new thing, but there's been a lot of, like, nostalgic genres out recently, like with the whole 80s revival synthwave stuff, right? So almost by doing this, it kind of, by trying to be old-fashioned, makes it sound modern, which I think is an interesting kind of contrast. Overall, I think you know, the sound of it is really served well by it, because it really makes the spaciness and the kind of psychedelic vibe sit really strongly in the music. Whereas something like, to compare to, you know, as I mentioned, the Sword in their earlier stuff is much more kind of rock, right? Whereas this is firmly in the psychedelic territory, which I think definitely makes it feel more unique.
It does feel fresh in a sense, because if you go back and listen to like an album by Cream or Led Zeppelin, there are songs like this on that album, but sometimes, as you say, it's just like the A-side or the B-side, and there's a lot more variation with like Cream's albums and stuff, where if you want to hear stuff like this, your best bet really is to listen to a band like Wolf People rather than purely picking out the songs that Cream wrote that were psychedelic.
And that's what I mean about this like capstone to the genre idea, is that they've gone, what are all the things that make psychedelic rock? What were all the things that really carried out through those albums and those movements in like the 60s and 70s and stuff, and they've just brought those elements together. And then maybe they could have pushed a little bit further in some areas and maybe tried to do something a little bit different. But at the same time, if you were like, define psychedelic folk music, you'd be like, well, okay, Wolf People, there you go. It's like spot on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it does what it says in the tin.
Pretty much, yeah. Now, I did want to ask Tom, I feel like there was a little bit of noodling on this album. How did you feel about that?
I'm alright with that, I think.
Oh,
I think,
really?
like, it depends what I'm listening to in terms of how much I like the noodles. I feel like with psychedelic stuff, you're there for something that's like spinning out a little bit and like, you know, tripping over itself and kind of like all that sort of thing. I feel like with metal, I feel more impatient with the music. I want it to be... Generally, I like metal that's fast. And I feel like with this, it just lives in such a different kind of world. It feels like summery. It feels bright and like glowing. It feels like you want to be sort of lazing around in a park listening to this kind of thing.
This music does conjure up a lot of like seasonal imagery for me. Some songs feel very like autumnal, and then other songs like obviously Night Witch is like a very wintry song, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think by comparison, a band like Gruzia, I feel like that's winter music. You know what I mean?
That's city music to me.
Yeah, it's like
city in winter music.
Yeah.
It's like freezing in a city, like just like bleak and chaotic all at once. This is not that. It's very much, it's doing what that album's doing, but it's doing it the opposite way around. It's calm, it's summery, it could be like, if you're going for a walk in the countryside, you could listen to this, you know, like and look at a river and all the little bugs dancing on the surface of the water. Nice, lovely,
beautiful. I'm there right now.
Yeah. Ooh.
It's nice.
Look at that.
Oh, the sun's warm.
There's a little man coming out of that hole.
It's a gnome.
Oh my god, a gnome!
It's got a knife.
Oh god!
Oh god!
We switched to Gruzia.
Oh god! Stop me! Run! Leave me!
Oh jeez. Then you step in a bear trap, turns to Cannibal Corpse.
No metal.
So, with all that said, and our weird descent into gnome violence, Tom, what would be your favourite tracks on the album?
Night Witch is the one that really stood out for me.
Yeah.
That was kind of where I sort of started to vibe with the album. I think, like, in general, I kind of just could put the album on kind of anywhere and tend to enjoy it. Maybe I just haven't spent enough time getting to know it, I'm not sure. But, like, this music's more immediate than a lot of metal. If you're listening to Nile, it might take a few listens before you kind of really vibe with it and start to recognise parts of it. Because it just is a bit more noisy, basically. This doesn't really have that, so I feel like I was very quickly like, okay, this is the sort of thing this is, and I like this. And, you know, another song that stood stood out was Salt's Mill. That bit where I just kept picking out the word childhood when he's like singing it. And it sounds just like Cream, you know, the band Cream.
Sounds like the
Sounds
band
like
Cream.
Not what you put on a scone.
And how about you, Josh?
Yeah, I thought it was cool. I enjoyed this overall. My favourite tracks were definitely Ninth Night and Thistles. I really liked Thistles. I thought that was really cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I like that. Definitely gonna go on the playlist.
On the old regular rotation.
No, on the Common Revolution.
Very good.
Yeah, so no, that's definitely going there. And I'm actually quite excited to check out some more of these guys.
Yeah.
After the show.
For sure.
I definitely want to hear what their other work sounds like.
It's like, if I want to listen to stuff like this, I'm going to listen to this band. I know that's potentially a bit of a redundant statement, but...
Yeah, well, true.
No, but I know what you mean, though, because it's like your one-stop shop for this kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, again, we've all picked like different tracks. Night Witch, obviously, one of the best tracks on the album, I think. Crumbling Dais was probably one of my favourites.
Ah, interesting.
I really overlook it a lot, I think, because it has quite like a fluty intro that doesn't really link to the rest of the song. So, you know, I can't really, like, when it starts playing, I think I quite often make the mistake of skipping it because I'm like, I don't recognise this track. But as soon as it goes past that and the guitars kick in again, I'm like, oh yeah, that is one of my favourite tracks in the album. It's pretty...
Oh man, that's interesting. Fluty, like that bit in Spinal Tap with the Stonehenge.
Yeah, the Spinal Tap comparison. I'm worried about the comparisons I make with music. 'Cause I'm making links in my brain that shouldn't make sense.
I once wrote a review for a music website, and it got posted on our Facebook page, and someone commented that the comparisons I'd drawn between them and another band were so ridiculous that they were unfollowing the page in protest. So don't worry.
Oh dear.
That's a bit worrying for our listenership.
No, I all the comments I got are almost universally negative. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
Increasingly worried for our listenership.
So as of episode 12, Josh will no longer be part of the Metal Face podcast.
He's got to start a band called Florence Borgir.
Half black metal would be fucking cool. I stand by
That
that.
would be cool, man. Up next, we're talking about Neutral Milk Hotels in the Aeroplane over the sea. Neutral Milk Hotel was an experimental indie folk rock band formed in 1989 that self-described as fuzzfolk. In the Aeroplane over the Sea is their second of only 2 albums, although they did have some other EPs as well. And is nonetheless considered their magnum opus and recognised as one of the most critically acclaimed and influential indie rock albums of all time.
Blimey.
It's easy to have a generic impression of what indie rock can sound like. I think this album kind of blows all that out of the water in a lot of ways. This album fuses blown out guitars and bass with pounding drums, as well as acoustic guitar and entire brass sections, even singing saws and bagpipes. There's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah, the singing saw. I found out what a singing saw was this week, and I'm amazed.
It's cool, isn't it?
It's very cool.
The vocal sound is pretty unusual as well. Every verse is sung in what sounds like one breath, one singular exhalation. So it becomes extremely strained and wailing and frantic a lot of the time. It's quite an unusual sound. There's a lot of mythos around this album. It came out in 1998, about the time the internet was really starting to grow.
Ah, the internet.
And this is one of the albums that got sort of really cult status on, music forums and music websites. They toured for a bit after they wrote this album, but I think they actually had to cut the tour short because their popularity was just too much for the singer to handle.
Oh, I'm dreading when we get to that point.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be terrible.
Our meteoric rise is bound to start soon, right?
So there's a lot of debate about what the album is actually about. The lyrics are sort of super surreal, really bizarre stuff in there. Lots of really unusual imagery. But there are more than a few allusions to the Second World War and Anne Frank, which is what it's generally considered to be about. It deals with ideas of childhood, of trauma, love, desire, and the abject failure of humanity to prevent the atrocities of the Second World War. So, it's big stuff. It's a lot to take in, yeah. But, that aside, Josh, what did you make of this?
So I found this interesting because when you said in the intro, this isn't what generic indie rock sounds like, I kind of disagree because I found it sounded a lot like my imagination of what indie rock was like.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
I kind of felt it sounded quite a lot like other things I heard. Looking at the date of it, I don't think that's because they copied anyone. I think it's because everyone else has been copying Neutral Milk Hotel.
Yeah, it's certainly very possible. You have this with Bowie a lot. Like, I've listened to a lot of Bowie, and there are songs where I was like, wait, this is Somebody Told Me by The Killers. But obviously, they took it from Bowie.
Yeah.
Or like, This Is the End by My Chemical Romance, but they took it from Bowie.
Yeah, no, it's a weird one, but even within that, this album really like crosses like a whole spectrum of different musical styles and approaches, which I enjoyed. There were some parts I definitely enjoyed more than others, though.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of natural for having so many things in a single work, you know. And I think that kind of calls back to what we were talking about earlier, because this is actually quite a when you factor in the number of different styles in this album, it's actually quite short.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's got everything from like indie, folk, fuzz, lo-fi stuff, really sort of, like I said, blown out amps and guitars, all the way to like Eastern European folk music kind of mixed in there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting combo. It almost, I think, like anticipates, like a lot of post-rock bands, which have that kind of same blown-out feel and like weird instruments and things. Yeah. And the brassy bits combined with the lo-fi guitars, in particular, remind me of a band called like Star Shells, who have a similar kind of style. But they're bona fide post-rock, So it's interesting.
Well, I love the brass section.
They're really cool, yeah. And I think it's so fascinating how this band, who, I don't necessarily draw a line easily between, heavy metal and indie rock, but here we are. You can see how they've directly influenced some, of the most modern developments in our kind of, favorite genre. And I think it's really cool, particularly when the lo-fi guitars are there. He's going all folk punky and it's kind of like, really fast vocals and quite intense. And when there's brass, I love all that.
Yeah, when it's is it King of Carrot Flowers Part 2, where it just drops into that like really rumbling kind of heavy guitar. I didn't expect it the first time I listened to it.
That was very unexpected. After the King of Carrot Flowers Part 1, the first track on the album, I thought it was going to be that the whole way through, and then when King of Carrot Flowers Part 2 and 3 started, it was like, okay, we're going in a totally different direction, complete U-turn, which, I don't know, there's a lot of things in this album which I don't know how they managed to bring them together, but they really did.
It's amazing it doesn't collapse under the weight of itself.
Yeah, particularly like the vocal style, I think it's quite often like quite separate from the music and quite above it. It's weird how you can put things that are so far apart, but they somehow manage to connect. I'm obviously
absolutely
not talented enough to understand how that works.
So one of the things that they did with this, Jeff Mangum, the singer, he didn't want it to be kind of digitally recorded, but I think they did kind of record it in a modern way, but then they fed everything back through like, and Josh, you might have to help me out here, through like kind of analog recording and like cassette kind of tapes and stuff, so that it would have that layer of like warm fuzz that you get on that sort of thing.
I appreciate that you think I know about these things, but I have very little understanding of how recording works, to be honest. But I think that sounds about right.
That sounds plausible.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Sounds plausible.
This is one of those albums that we've covered where it wasn't enough time in the week for me to really digest it, I think. I wish I'd had more time for it.
Yeah, this is, there's a lot in this.
Yeah, on first listen, I didn't love it, but
no.
I listened to it again a couple more times, and then listening to it this morning, right before we recorded, oh my god, it's grown on me more and more and more, and I'm really enjoying it now. Like, there's certain songs that I love, like, they are like 10 out of 10 tracks, and it feels like I'm going to try and think quite hard about how to make this point, because I don't know if I've got the right words for it. But it feels more satisfying because it's like hard earned, because I've had to pay attention to the music and understand it a bit more.
Yeah.
I feel like I like it even more for that fact. Whereas, like I said with Florence the Machine, it's pleasant music immediately, and it's kind of easy to understand why it's nice.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cultural cues that help you out of just like, you've heard pop before, you've heard indie before.
Yeah.
You're kind of already there when you listen to Florence the Machine.
I think for me it's probably because it's just so far away from other stuff that I have heard and that I am into. Yeah. Like, you were talking about this whole, was it indie fuzz? That sort of...
they call it folk fuzz. Or fuzz folk.
See, like, and that makes
that's a good word for it.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, but it's also very different from Wolf People, which I feel like is closer to the stuff I normally listen to. Wolf People is not far from sludge and things like that, whereas this is very different, and it's taken me a bit more to get into it. But now that I'm into it, it's going to be on the common, whatever Josh called it earlier.
The common occurrence.
The common revolution.
The common revolution.
Yeah, and I think it lives in such an unusual world conceptually. It doesn't feel like, we're talking about Wolf People, you just kind of feel like you're in the forest or at a 60s festival. Florence the Machine, it's like a sort of dramatic kind of nightclub or like, love life kind of thing. This lyrically is really unusual, very surreal, and it situates itself a little bit in like the Second World War and that period of time, but it also situates itself in like memory. It feels to me like it's like somebody looking back over their life, kind of knowing that they're going to die. There's nothing about this album that makes you think about the future, It all feels like reflection on the past.
Quite introspective, really, isn't it? It's got a very internal kind of focus there.
I think the vocal style really leans into that with the sort of stream of consciousness, like just rambling out the lyrics almost in a way. And just
absolutely.
winding round different parts of the music.
Yeah, and there's a lyric in there about now she's a little boy in Spain playing pianos filled with flames. It's like, I don't know what to imagine there, but at the same time it's full of imagery.
It's kind of open to the imagination, isn't it? Like it gives all these very dramatic kind of vistas and kind of surrealist, kind of almost Dali-esque worlds.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I kind of imagine the sort of Dali-esque like colour scheme. Like there's a lot of like brown and orange and yellow in this. I don't know why. I feel like I'm wearing corduroy no matter what I'm imagining.
You're wearing corduroy and you have a centre-parted hair that comes down exactly to your shoulders. You're in a Wes Anderson film gone wrong.
I don't know if gone wrong is even the right thing, though. I feel like it is like Wes Anderson in a way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. 'Cause there's something about it that's like slightly sort of ugly in terms of like his voice is very like wailing. A lot of the instruments are like blown out and stuff.
Yeah, but
it's still.
I don't know if like things like ugly and gone wrong are the right words because it just feels quite honest to me. It feels quite human, quite open, and in particular the song "Ghost" near the end of the album.
Oh yeah,
that's the track that actually did give me a feeling of sort of resolution, and not in a because I agree with the other things you've said about the album about it being sort of feeling a bit about like reflection on your life and death. And then I think Ghost sort of wasn't about doing away with those feelings, but more just sort of being at peace with them and being okay with it.
It's quite triumphant, isn't it? And it sort of takes like, as the album goes on, it takes stuff that you heard earlier in the album, kind of rephrases it. I don't know if it does it directly, but it feels constantly like it's calling back to itself and kind of circling around the sound over and over again. You get these different movements in different songs. Like it's like you've got happy, sad, like melancholy stuff, and then he divides it up into like, now there's a sad song like halfway through, and then at the end, there's kind of this like jubilant, sort of triumphant kind of feeling to it. It wraps up really nicely. It doesn't feel like a depressing album, but at the same time, there's parts of it that are like genuinely sad.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a weird contrast, isn't it? I think almost it's a bit like Florence the Machine in that sense, in that a lot of the songs.
So a bit like Dimmu Borgir.
Yeah, so it's very much a black metal album.
When you really think about it,
you gotta really think.
No, yeah, but like. To be serious, with Florence on Ceremonials, there's a couple of tracks which are really bleak, but the album still sounds quite positive and uplifting.
And the folklore of the album suggests that. So the story basically goes that Jeff Mangum, he found a copy of Anne Frank's diary when he was in Amsterdam, and he read it kind of start to finish and was so surprised with I'm kind of overwhelmed by this idea that there was this young girl so full of life who her life was destroyed by this kind of completely abhorrent existential force. And he said that he just sort of broke down after that and was like, how could this have happened? And a lot of people suggest that this album is like his answer to that, of like the world is a dark place and is full of all these tragic moments and moments of genuinely like deep melancholy and like sadness, but it's also ultimately filled with like joy and the triumphant, jubilant thing of even being alive. Like, there's a line in it where he says how strange it is to be anything at all.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that a lot.
Oh, it's getting all deep.
It is getting deep.
It's very existential album.
Yeah.
It needs some existential chats.
I'm going to do Action Bronson next time. I think like that's...
Yeah, a bit more just like fun.
Yeah. So did you guys have any favourite tracks?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say Two-Headed Boy and Holland 1945.
Yeah.
Were two really, really good tracks. I love the guitar sound throughout the whole album, and I think Holland 1945 started like so powerfully.
Yeah.
And it hit hard, and I think that was, as well, whilst listening to the album, that's the point where I started to do a bit of research and noticed the like Anne Frank connection and started thinking about the lyrics in that context, and that's when it kind of hit pretty hard.
Yeah, I definitely find that like I can put this on and kind of enjoy it, but I always end up getting swept up into like the feel of it, which, as we say, is like there's a darkness to it, but it doesn't leave you kind of feeling sad.
No,
it's ultimately there is, as I say, something triumphant about it.
It's an interesting mix there for sure.
Yeah. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, for me, my top tracks were King of Carrot Flowers 2 and 3, and In the Aeroplane Over the Sea, right, the title track.
Oh, yeah.
And like I don't know, there's a lot to like in this album.
Yeah.
There's some bits which don't grab me as much, but the bits I do like, I think, are really good. So I'm really happy just to focus on those, and those songs I think sum that up.
Nice, yeah. I tend to listen to the whole album in one go when I listen to it. But there are moments that I wait for, and I think, Holland 1945 and In the Aeroplane Over the Sea, they sort of stand out. The song Ghost I also really, really like.
That was definitely very good.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of bad choices on this, for sure.
No.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that was episode 10 of the Metal Face podcast,
Episode 10. Fuck me.
or episode 1 of the No Metal Face podcast.
Of the Face podcast.
Yes. We covered Florence the Machine and their album Ceremonials, Wolf People with their album Ruins, and Neutral Milk Hotel with their album In the Aeroplane Over the Sea.
Gotta say, what a weird name for a band. Neutral
Very
Milk
weird, yeah.
Hotel. A Milk Hotel already feels weird, but the fact that it's neutral, what's up with that?
I don't know. My theory is if you've got milk of magnesia, which you take if you got an upset stomach, and that's alkaline.
Okay.
So neutral milk would be that. And you've got a hotel that serves it.
That's an interesting idea. Well, give me 500 words on that.
You have a PhD dissertation on that by the end of the week, which is tomorrow. So
So how do we feel like this non-metal, sober, daylight recording of the Metal Face podcast went?
well, I've had to close my curtains to reduce reverb, and now my room is really dingy. And I feel quite sleepy. So
Brilliant. So the non-metal episode sent Josh to sleep, in short.
no, not because of the music.
I do. I enjoy having these episodes within the season, as we call it.
Yeah.
It's nice to sort of take a step outside and see what else is going on.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to going further afield, I think, on future episodes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think doing some hip hop or some
that'd be
ska
cool.
pop or something is going to be very different.
Yeah, I wonder if we played it a little bit too safe this week.
If you think we played it safe or didn't, leave a comment and tell us.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'd like
And-
to know what other people who are listening to this podcast also like that is outside of metal. And
Yeah, definitely.
what should we be listening to? Because I think it's a area that we need help.
We need help.
Guidance.
We're lost.
Checking stuff out that's outside of the genre that you listen to makes you appreciate your own kind of tastes as well. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
While we're on the subject of audience participation, we have up on our Facebook page at the moment a post where you can comment what album you'd like to see in next season. And we'll do a poll before the season starts and we'll review something that you like for a change.
Hopefully not for a change.
So we are hurtling towards the end of our first season. We've actually only got one more set of albums to cover, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So next week we are all going big. We've picked some big bands. So Tom, what are you bringing next week?
So next week, we are going to be listening to Rammstein's most recent album, their self-titled album.
It was, I think, my top album of 2020, according to my Spotify Wrapped
Oh,
summary at
really?
the end of the
Damn.
year. Yeah, a lot of the songs on there were, the album was the number one album,
Yeah.
and then I think out of my, top 20 songs, probably half of them were from this album.
Brilliant.
I listened to it a lot.
Oh, that's awesome, yeah.
Josh, how about you? What are you bringing?
I'm bringing... Okay, I think this is going to be another one where I bring hate upon myself.
A Josh move.
God.
Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park.
Ah!
I'm sorry. It's unfairly maligned. I think it gets... I think you guys will actually like it.
Okay, so my choice will be Ghost with their album Melioria.
Been waiting for Ghost on this podcast.
And we will be covering the deluxe edition, which has the track Square Hammer on it, because...
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Isn't it nuts that that's not on the original album, given that it's
I know.
That's crazy.
Can't
That's
believe
their biggest song.
It was one of the biggest songs of the last 5 years or something in metal.
It's gotta be, yeah. Yeah, so we'll be getting a little bit spooky next week.
A little bit spooky. We're all going to be dressed as our respective bands. Ben's going to be there dressed as a pope. I can just be there dressed as in my lederhosen.
I'll have my ridiculous oversized jeans and wallet chain.
Nice.
God.
Backwards baseball cap.
Fuck. All right.
Right, well, I look forward to next week.
Frosted tips.
Ooh.
Fantastic. All right.
If you buy the Patreon, you'll be able to see my frosted tips.
Yeah.
Yes, the Patreon, which doesn't exist.
Our OnlyFans.
When it does exist. In 10 years' time.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, I will catch you guys next week. For
Next week.
some
Sweet.
big old band.
Oh, yeah.
See you later, guys.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
That was the Metal Face Podcast. Go follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for Season and Mist, Character Anger, and Separation for their music in the intro. And thank you to Johnny Peterson for transition music throughout. Go check out his projects at Heads for the Dead, Massacre, Wormvale, and Wombat. And most importantly, thank you for listening. Take it easy, and hail Satan.
I think this is one of the first albums... No, that's not one of the first.
One
I
of the
think
first
this is
albums I've ever listened to.
I never listened to music before this.
I've been lying every week.
I won't do it again.
You've gone. I shan't be coming back.